Hello everyone, this is another video on JavaScript. In the previous lesson we learned about what is JavaScript and we looked into some of the basic programming concepts such as conditions, loops, and the use of variables. In this lesson we'll focus more on how we can modify HTML in real time using JavaScript to add some interactivity to our web pages. First, let's create a simple form similar to the one we made in the HTML part of the series. We're going to use some fields that require validation, namely age and username. If the age is not a number, or if it's not a realistic number, we want to display an error that tells the user the age entered is not valid. In the same way, if the username is too long or if it contains other than letters or numbers, we'll show an error to the user. So here's the code for our form. Again, it's very similar to what we did in a previous video. We have labels and input fields. What we'll do next is to add a script section to our HTML file, which will allow us to type JavaScript code. We're going to create our own function called validate. The empty parentheses mean that we're not taking in any parameters. On the other hand, remember we've used the alert function which had a parameter, i.e. the message that we wanted to display. When we call the validate function, we'll simply type validate followed by a set of empty parentheses. Next, we want to link our function to the submit button. We do this by adding onClick equals validate. Just to confirm that this is working, we'll add an alert inside of the validate function. Now we can see that upon clicking the submit button, the function gets called and the alert gets displayed. Now we'll create our error messages. By default, they're going to be hidden, and whenever the errors apply, we're going to make them visible through JavaScript. We're using the p tag for each error and giving them an ID, which will allow us to access them in the JavaScript code. We're also adding the style attribute, which is inline CSS. Display none makes the error invisible, and color red makes the text red. At this point, let's do another test. We want to start displaying errors when clicking the button. We do this using the function document.getElementById followed by the ID that we defined earlier, username error1. Since the result is an object, we can access the style with .style and then display the element using .display equals inline. Inline means the paragraph will be on the same level as the input field, as opposed to being on a different line. Display equals block would display it on the next line. Now if we click the button, we see the error that we chose to display. So now that we know this is working, we can start writing our code for the form validation. We'll go ahead and create a new function called username validation. Let's use getElementById just like we did in the validate function, only this time we'll put the result in a variable and then we'll be able to use this variable to do the validation. We're getting the value of the username field, so we need to add value at the end. So the first thing we want to validate is the length of the username. In JavaScript, a string or text variable has a property called length, which gives us the number of characters that it contains. So all we need to do is to write a condition that goes if username dot length is less than 3, or username dot length is more than 20. Now we want to have access to the error messages in the same way that we did with the username itself. So we create new variables for error 1 and error 2. The error for the length is the first one, so if the condition is true, then we want to display it with username error 1 that style the display equals inline. This is exactly what we did in our test with the validate function, only this time we're using a variable. Next up, we need to make sure that the username contains only letters and numbers. The way we're going to do this is by looping through all the characters, and as soon as one is not a letter nor a number, then we show the error. In the previous lessons, we saw how to create a do-while loop. Now this one will be what we call a for loop. It's going to look like this. What this does is to create a counter variable that starts with the value 0. Then we have the looping condition. As long as the counter is less than the length of the string, we keep looping. Then we increase the counter by 1 using the syntax counter plus plus. Now inside the loop, we're going to need a condition that checks the current character. In JavaScript, there's a function called char@, which picks a single character out of a string. Username.char@counter will allow us to check the character at the current index. But now we need to compare this character with something else. So we'll create a new variable that contains the allowed characters, meaning the alphabet and numbers from 0 to 9. We don't need lower and uppercase for the letters because we'll use another function called toLowerCase, which will take the character and convert it to lowercase. Finally, we call the includes function on our string of allowed characters to verify whether it includes the current character. If it doesn't, then we display the error. The exclamation point inverts the logic, so that means if allowed characters doesn't include the character, then do the following. Now let's keep the validate function and use it to call username validation. If we go back to the page, we can test our new function. If the username has less than 3 characters, we see the error. If it contains special characters, we see the other error. The only problem now is that if the username is valid, we're not hiding the error messages. So let's add this behavior by using an else statement. Now let's enter an invalid username to see the errors. And then if we enter a valid one, then the errors will disappear. All we need to do now is to validate the age, which should be fairly easy now that we did it for the username. We'll create a new function, age validation. We get the user input from the age field. First, we want to make sure that the age is made up of numbers. Again, we'll create a variable for allowed characters, but this time only include numbers. We can copy and paste the for loop that we had before because the logic is the same. We just need to create new variables for the age errors. And we update the variables inside of the condition. Next, let's say we want the age to be between 5 and 90. We simply write a condition that says if age is less than 5 or age is more than 90, however, at this point, the age is in a text variable. So if we want to compare it to a number, we need to convert it into a number. This is done with parse int. And then we use the variable as a parameter. If this is true, we show the error, otherwise we hide it. Lastly, we add the age validation call to the main validation function that is called by the form button. Let's do a final test. If the age contains other than numbers, we see the first error. If it's outside of the bounds, we see the second error. And the validation for the username is also working. If the name has the wrong length or if it has special characters, then we see the appropriate errors. That's it for this lesson. In the next one, we'll start looking at how we can submit forms and send the information to be used in a different page. This will be done with the PHP language. Thanks for watching and see you next time.